Good day to all. A very warm welcome again. So we want to talk today about, specifically here about Mark Bilby's contribution. He's a scientist, data scientist, and a Bible scholar, really. And his work is specifically on Marcion's gospel and Marcion priority. We're going to mention a few other scholars today as well. But I wanted to really ram home the idea here in this dominant and updated thesis for Marcion's gospel, basically quite potentially being the first to really come into existence here, alongside, I want to say, and I'm not entirely sure of this myself, but maybe alongside Marx, or that maybe Marx is later, but it could still be before Marcion's. It has a slightly different structure to it. I think Marcion still looks as though it is certainly shorter and more stripped down, more primitive, I should say. So we're going to go through that today quite quickly. I've got 3 essays open in front of me, so I just wanted to run through some of the data points here that suggest, I think, relatively strongly here that Marcion's gospel predates the other 4. And remember, Luke's gospel is based, looks resoundingly like it's based on Marcion's gospel. Now, all of this information can be found in a YouTube video called 100 Reasons Why Marcion Predates Luke, and it's by Mark Bilby is interviewed here by Gnostic informant, I think. And that's very useful here, and he just flows through the 100 reasons I have in front of me for really robustly arguing that Marcion predates Luke and is therefore probably one of the oldest Gospels. So the linguistic, and there are 100 reasons here, linguistic and morphological indicators. So lots of the dative case frequencies here. Optative mood is common in Luke, absent in Marcion, suggesting attestation revisions. Middle participles, and I don't know half of these as well. But these are technical terms here that help us understand why the Greek used here. Hapax legiomena, unique New Testament words here, substantially higher in Luke, implying later lexical enrichment. As an example, relative clauses, more numerous and complex in Luke, simpler or absent in Marcion's. So you can see here a whole spacing out now and interpolating into, and even whole chapters appear in Luke that are not there in Marcion. Dative case frequency, higher proportion of dative constructions in Marcion, reflecting earlier coin usage. Luke shifts towards accusative dominance. This is, all rather technical here. These are slightly easier though. Narrative and structural indicators. The infancy narratives, of course, Luke 1 and 2, only in Luke. Genealogy, Luke 3:23 and 30 to 38, absent in Marcion. And this is an expansion towards Jewish messianism here. The Capernaum as opening. This is in Luke, but it yields a mistake. Luke's here has a mistake in it, which is quite well known. When we look at these in this information, Luke's author says, "Do the things that you did in another place." I can't remember. I think it might have been it would have been the Galilee somewhere, and it hasn't happened yet in Luke. And this shows here a distortion where an interpolator made a mistake basically and got things out of chronology. The absence of baptism of Jesus here, not in Marcion and present in Luke. Absence of disciples' baptisms, no ritual initiations in Marcion, frequent in Luke. So it's a fleshing out here of the, of the story. No angelic annunciation, absent in Marcion, numerous in Luke. No Magnificat or Benedictus, Lucan hymnic expansions missing from Marcion. Shorter passion narrative. Again, no extended Herod Pilate trial sequence. Not there in Marcion. No Emmaus or Bethany ascension here. They just go on and on. Theological and ideological indicators. There's again absence of a fulfillment formula, completely absent in Marcion, and there of course in Luke. Minimal use of it was necessary. A Lucan hallmark missing entirely in Marcion. Now, how would that be if these guys were this? If these guys were different people, or someone was trying to go back and strip down Luke, why do it in such a specific way here? So it indeed misses whole grammatical styles there seem to be added in Luke and are not there in Marcion. Why? And this is a really clear signature that whoever's adding quite substantial information is adding it in places where someone obviously is not the same writer as the original. No Elisha typology, goes on and on. So I'm just going to jump now so we can explain a little more of these things and flesh out exactly what's going on. So the earliest attestation and canonical silence. So Marcion of Sinope, 140-ish CE, provides the first datable evidence of a Christian gospel used in a fixed canon. His Evangelion, paired with 10 Pauline epistles, predates any explicit reference to the Gospel of Luke. And that on its own might not be that strong a piece of evidence, because we can just assume that, maybe it came first, like Luke came first, but we don't have evidence for it. So it slightly nudges here the argument towards a Marcion priority here. Just, all the evidence begins to come into resolution when we compare all of this stuff. The first author to name Luke as a gospel is Irenaeus. This is 30 or so years after this point here. The 40-year silence prior to Irenaeus, despite the widespread use of other sources, indicates that Marcion's text, not Luke, is historical first. And Tertullian here says that in Versus Marcion 4:2, Marcion was the first to separate the New Testament. Okay, so he's clearly brought an addition, his own addition into the world, into Rome, of course, first, where so much of early Christianity really began to form. Marcion's Evangelion is thus the earliest recorded instance of text corresponding to Luke, showing that the canonical Luke emerges as a reaction to Marcion's gospel, not vice versa. Yeah, so Luke is trying to correct and add important information from this now proto kind of orthodox church that became fairly orthodox and in Irenaeus' time. Direction of structural expansion. Marcion's gospel, 6,000 to 8,000 words, is far shorter than canonical Luke at 19,000. An expansion occurs in discrete narrative blocks: infancy and genealogy, Luke 1-3, extended travel narratives, 2:51, 19, 27, resurrection and ascension narratives. So they look, again, as I say, like interpolations into the text, an earlier text, 24:1-53. These additions form coherent new material rather than random truncations, indicating that Luke expanded Marcion. Statistical analysis of 100 linguistic and narrative features, La Bilby 2023, shows these expansions cluster precisely in the Lucan-only material, with a p-value of -10 to the 8th big numbers, yeah, big numbers. The coherent pattern of deletions would yield such internally balanced narrative flow. Stylometric gradient, simpler coin, and atticized Luke here. So atticizing is more formal and added materials, more structured, right? Stylometric measures confirm an upward shift in grammatical and lexical sophistication from Marcion to Luke. Marcion shows minimal use of operatives, articular infinitives, entilics, and perfect verbs. Here, Luke employs all these at rates typical of 2nd century atticizing coin. Greek. The Attic revival in Greek rose from 130 to 170 CE, matching Luke's style perfectly. Therefore, Luke's language cannot predate Marcion's simpler form. Great evidence here for what I'm talking about. Theological directionality. Marcion's text lacks every element later used to defend proto-orthodox theology, no birth narrative, genealogy, as we said, fulfillment, formula, or temple piety. Luke systematically adds these. Removing them would undermine orthodoxy. Adding them consolidates it. Okay, text nearly always evolves towards apologetic complexity, not away from it. And we see this in the evolution entirely of the New Testament. From a basic, celestial, grand celestial deity into a formal, proper, structured historical narrative that only but appears chronologically. Clear data, redactional link to Acts. Luke and Acts share a distinct linguistical fingerprint. Attestisms again, historic precedents, parallel preface, most excellent Theophilus. These features do not occur in Marcion's Gospel, indicating that both Luke and Acts are later coordinated redactions expanding an earlier evangelion. It makes more sense. Manuscript prestige. P69 from Oxyrhynchus, Papyrus 69, 3rd century emits Luke 22:20, the second cup, aligning with Marcion's omission, recorded by Tertullian 440. I think versus Marcion, that would be 440. This papyrus witnesses a shorter Lucan textual stream, more consistent with Marcion's Gospel, confirming that a Marcion-like recension circulated early and independently. Pauline coherence. Marcion's Gospel matches undisputed Pauline letters in tone and vocabulary. There's about a 9% overlap compared with Luke's 4%. Grace-centered, anti-legalist, heavenly Christology, and no explicit nativity. Of course, the alignment suggests Marcion's Gospel and Paul's letters emerged from the same theological milieu before the latter Judaizing redaction of Luke. The Q material concentration, approximately 55% of reconstructed Q sayings appear in Marcion's Gospel, but only 40 of Luke overall, and this is if you believe in Q. If Marcion abridged Luke, he inexplicably preserved more of the Q sayings than Luke himself. A pattern that only makes sense if Marcion's form predates Luke and shares direct affinity with the early sayings tradition. Literary and cultural additions, all Greco-Roman literary imitations, Socratic dialogues, Josephine historiography, Homeric motifs as well are found in Luke, never in Marcion. So Luke here has been shown to use Josephus, But these things, a lot of the more the larger narratives that are in Josephus are not in Marcion's gospel. What's going on? It is again further evidence for Marcion's priority. This suggests that canonical look reflects a later literate editor embedding classical allusions to elevate the gospel's cultural standing, and established phenomena in the 2nd century, and this rewriting process. Consensus drift. There's quite a lot of this here. I will go through them all for people who are interested. In 2010, fewer than 5% of peer-reviewed discussions endorsed or allowed Marcion priority. By 2025, roughly 25 did. The shift is empirical evidence of converging data, linguistic, theological, and structural trends increasingly favour a Marcion first hypothesis. Silence in the early fathers before Irenaeus, neither Justin, Martin, or Papias shows awareness of canonical Luke. Justin and no one else in Christianity. Like, you'd expect more noise, but you don't get it. Justin, 150 CE or thereabouts, never names Luke, instead quoting harmonized traditions alien to canonical Luke. Actually, more, as we've shown here, they're actually more close to Marcion, like the cluster, the Sermon of the Mount in Marcion fitting Justin's wording. All right, big evidence. Papias, 120-ish, lists only Mark and Matthew traditions. What? Wow, okay. If Luke predated Marcion, both should have known it. Their silence is powerful negative evidence. Textual physics and probability. To preserve Luke first, one must posit that Marcion flawlessly removed over 11,000 words, including every genealogy, travel scene, and theological fulfillment, without leaving narrative damage. The probability of such precise ideological excision is infinitesimal. Conversely, additive expansion is routine in ancient literature. Mark, Matthew, and Luke, the Iliad interpolations, and so on. By Occam's razor, expansion explains the data most parsimoniously. Echoes in other early Gospels. The Gospels of the Hebrews, Egyptians, and Thomas share Marcion's simplicity. No birth or resurrection elaboration, minimal narrative scaffolding. Such convergence across multiple early streams strengthens the claim that Marcion preserves an early common gospel core. Bayesian restatement here. So we're just going to get very quickly into Bayes' theory. Given these 13 independent evidentiary clusters, conservative Bayesian modelling with prior 0.3 yields posterior of 30% here, essentially yields posterior of 99.5%. Even an ultra-conservative prior 0.1 gives us 87%, so 10% that these things would be this way, that Marcion would naturally be the first, and that Luke would carry on. So we're saying 10% likelihood, and that's quite slim odds actually. We're given the evidence, that the prior evidence that we have, and now stacked together, all of this stuff yields a 99.5% likelihood that Marcion's gospel predates Luke. So the evidence directionally and probabilistically favours the hypothesis that Marcion's gospel, Evangelion, predates canonical Luke's. The final assessment, all measurable trends, stylistic, structural, theological, historical, flow in one direction, from Evangelion to Luke, not from Luke to Evangelion. Okay. And very quickly here, so each major evidentiary cluster is grounded in published and or accessible research. Okay, so attestation, chronology here, Irenaeus, of course, versus heresies, Tertullian versus Marcion, no prior references to Luke. Okay, textual expansion, Klinghardt, Matthias Klinghardt, Marcion's Gospel in the New Testament, Bilby's normalized data sets, So stylometric differentiation, David Badun, that's right, the First New Testament, 2013, that's when that came out. He made a good reconstruction, serviceable reconstruction, better now are coming along. Bilby's The First Gospel, 2022 preprint. Theological layering, Dieter Roth, Marcion on the Text of Luke and Acts, 2015. Marcus Vincent, Marcion and the Dating of the Synoptic Gospels. So manuscript support here in P69, which we went through, Papyrus 69, and the absence of Luke, 2220, lessons in 2015. Tuckett, Lucan, textual transmissions, Pauline correlation. Again, it's all attested by scholars now, making these conclusions. The moderated certainty here. Academic publication requires probabilistic humility. Okay, the final claim should avoid absolute language. A recommended phrasing here. So this is what I used here to make sure that I'm being it's relevant information. I'm being conversant with how we should be thinking as scholars. And by the way, I'm not a scholar. Under the tested priors and evidence weights, the Bayesian model yields posteriority, probabilities here exceeding 99.9% for Marcion priority within the limits of available data and acknowledged interdependence among features. This result designates Marcion's Evangelion as the statistically most probable antecedent of canonical Luke. A contextualization within the current scholarship. Most contemporary scholars, Goodacre, Fitzmyer, Bovon, still assume Luke's priority. However, the Bayesian approach offers measurable clarity where cumulative argumentation has stagnated. Recent re-evaluations by Badun, Klinghardt and Vincent indicate a significant paradigmatic shift. Okay, between 2010 and 2025, the proportion of peer-reviewed work allowing or the endorsement of Marcion priority has risen from 5 to 25%, an empirical sign of accumulating evidential weight here. So I'll leave that with you guys to consider. I hope some of you made it to the end. It's all worth really studying this. Have a look at Bilby's video there, 100 Reasons Why Marcion Predates Luke. You'll find it on YouTube. He rushes through 100 different examples here and explains them, of course, way better than I can. And I think it's all very interesting, and this is of key importance in the thesis that I put forward, and now the evolving thesis here that Gnostic and this heterodox thought running through Christianity was at its earliest strain, and the innovation was to make the gospel stories, to embellish, make them larger, and of course then bring celestial Jesus down to earth and mythologize the story and try and humanize this mythology, which today we find so hard to do. It's so difficult to do this, and of course no evidence exists outside of those four Gospels. And the evidence that we do have in the four Gospels is of course wildly contradictory and has different there are different purposes for it. John is, of course, very different, apocalyptic, strange. The desires on these communities is different. Placed on these different communities, of course, is very different. So I'll leave that there. Have a good day. Cheers.